Alright, so you asked, I can't click on the jungler fast enough when I see them on the minimap. Any idea how to train that? Turns out I do. So there are ways to train your mouse accuracy. One of them is with strict movements, just movements without any game or anything else. You can use the mouse as a prop for that. The second one that's a little bit more tangible is to use an aiming trainer, like exact aiming that you see right here. And the third one is as a warm-up in League to actually click on stuff related to League, which, I mean, it's a nice League warm-up sometimes if there's specific mechanics to what you're doing. But obviously, the more targeted you are at the specific movements of the mouse, the better. So what that means is, for example, I usually recommend just using aim for hundreds, exact aiming as you see here. Zoom it in, so as you can see, I zoomed this in to, for me this is 200%. Might be different for you. And the more accurate that you need to click certain targets, the more you need a different aspect of your mouse control. So the first one is quick flicking like this. And there are people who use their shoulder as a pivot. So essentially they're making movements with either their shoulder or their elbow. You can't see the difference here, but you can, if you have different pivots. Your shoulder is a pivot. It extends to your elbow, and that extends to your wrist. And your wrist is the most common pivot. So if you swap that around in a safe and sound manner, that would be the quickest way. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that if this is your wrist, that you use that little, I don't know what it's called, that little piece of bone in the bottom right. You can press that lightly into your mouse mat, and then you can circle around from there with your mouse. So this is your pivot, right? And from there you can make movements. And if you go forwards, like obviously there's a little wiggling room. You can press everything forwards just fine without really moving around too much. So you just extend or retract your fingers, right? So if you have your fingers like this, you can retract them and extend them, right? That's how you cause this movement. And then sometimes I come a little bit short, and that's when you just use essentially the extra pivots a little bit, just a tiny little bit. I use my arm a little bit. I push with my elbow. My elbow also has a little bit of wiggling room. My skin can wiggle around, right? So even if I don't lift up my arm, I can wiggle my elbow around a little bit on my on the resting position. So that means that I can cover the entire screen like that. All right. And there are people who mainly use the elbow as a pivot or mainly use the shoulder. I don't recommend that. I recommend that you mostly just use the wrist. Everything else is just a little bit of support. Okay, now, with that out of the way, let's talk about the two different movements. So if I make a really big flicking motion, what matters most is that I just have some muscle memory for how big a certain distance is. And what you'll notice is that if you track my speed is very high, and then I go very low towards the end. And the worse you are at mouse accuracy, the earlier you need to start slowing down and visually tracking where you are. So ideally, you would want to do this blind. If I just do this blind, I'm gonna be roughly in the right spot. And the better you are at mouse accuracy, the better that gets. What you want to do is you have to understand that the more control you want, so there's the flicking aspect, and then there's the getting it in the right space once you get there, right? So I want to get it towards the space as fast as I can, and towards the end there, I've got to slow down. Slowing down is easiest when you have a lot of grip. So you don't want to squeeze the mouse too hard because you're gonna strain your hand and wrist. But if you have a very natural palming position, you can grip it very strong without straining your hand. So what that means is that if you flip your mouse around, it should lay naturally in your hand. If I claw my mouse, it means that my fingers are retracted. If you just let go of the mouse and you shake your hand loose, and you notice, if you just loosen it up, and then just put a little bit of tension so that your hand doesn't fall flat towards the bottom. It just extends parallel with your underarm, then you'll notice there's this slight curvature of the hand, and that is essentially how you want to pick up your mouse. You almost don't want to deviate from the natural position. If you use a Razer Death Adder, a huge mouse like that, you won't have to deviate almost at all. So if that is the case, you can grip it very strong without almost any stress on your wrist. The more you claw it, the more you're going to screw your wrist if you do the combination of gripping it strongly and then moving your wrist around. So if you wanted to grip it very strong, it would be better to use your shoulder as a pivot and just keep your entire arm in the same place. So you just use this piece doesn't move individually in that case. But that is all not recommended. What is recommended is that you just palm grip your mouse, which means that you don't form a claw with your hand, and just smoothly grab the mouse and grip it quite strong. That's going to give you control. That's going to give you that control to slow down to a point. And the more control you want, the more you need to make small movements, the more you rely on your ability to grip strongly and essentially make smaller movements. Usually smaller movements are all about stabilization. Stabilization is all about grip. Alright, let's do a demonstration here. So I grip my mouse rather tightly, just do the flicking movements like this. Any weaknesses that I see are going to be very apparent when I do this exercise. As you can see, I'm not making any unnecessary movements, like I'm not wiggling around too much. I'm just straight line, one movement. And that's what you want to do in a real game as well. The less movements you need, the better, because that gives you more time for observations, more time to think about things. The less actions you need to do, the less you need to worry about them. The quicker you can do them, the quicker you can go on to the next step in the decision-making process. So here I can think about other things. This does not take any effort, because I know how to do it. I don't need any extra actions for it. And eventually it's going to be overwhelming when there's a fifth target added. But for League's purposes, that's usually already more than enough. This is a little bit bigger than the target on the minimap, so you can put it a little bit smaller than this if you want to have better practice. And I notice that once I need more accurate control, I need to re-grip my mouse and really grip it tight. Make sure that I have that stabilization, because I'm flicking just fine, but the stabilization is a little bit weak. So you want to understand those are two different components. The muscle movement and the grip, like stabilizing it. You can see I'm just barely coming short here on a lot of these targets. Alrighty. So that's 64,000. You also want to make sure that you have proper posture. If you don't, you're gonna strain your shoulder as well. So you want to make sure that your shoulder blade is nice and relaxed. You want to keep as much as you can properly relaxed. I sometimes massage some parts that get a little bit sore. It's not required at all. It's just to speed up the recovery process, so they can do another try again faster. That's a basic concept of it. So that's how you can practice it. And if you look at my score progression, I haven't progressed in a few years. I've never really gotten more serious than what I was at some point. I used to get very low scores, but I don't think they're on the chart anymore. I used to get scores like 40,000, 50,000. Now even a warm-up is over 60,000. My record is 80,000. I slowly built up towards 70k over the course of 500 tries. If you try, let's say, 50 times, so over the course of 2 months, you play this a few times every day, or a few times each other day, then you're gonna climb by tens of thousands of points and get much better accuracy. Good luck.